Good morning. It's great to be with you here and to be able to share the interesting news and other facts that we have about the VMware ecosystem. And the first point that I wanted to make, echoing what Maurizio was saying, is that through a lot of work by many of you and our partners, we've been able to really achieve the status of an ecosystem. VMware's products now really form a foundation around which many other products come together to provide very interesting solutions that are allowing our customers to do some very, very useful work. I'm going to spend my time this morning talking to you about our strategy going forward, the kinds of things that we're trying to do with our technology and why we're trying to do those things. And I'd like to remind you that you're all welcome to come back at this time tomorrow morning when Steve Herod, our Chief Technology Officer, will be here. And he's going to drill down into many of the things that I will be talking about this morning in a lot more detail and give you a lot more of the technology behind these product initiatives. So please feel welcome to come back tomorrow morning, listen to Steve, and get a lot more detail. Now, virtualization started off as a fairly small point solution to allow a solution to some very specific problems. But it's one of those technologies that has amazing legs. It's been able to show that it can grow and do many more things for customers over time. And fundamentally, what we think we're about is addressing this problem, that IT has the issue that too much of the effort goes into things that fundamentally don't differentiate the business. Most of IT today is having to spend its effort keeping essentially the lights on and the show running, tending to the plumbing rather than tending to the things that really give competitive differentiation. And in the long term, this is unsustainable, particularly in these tough economic times. We've got to allow customers to move more of their resources into things that will fundamentally differentiate them, give them competitive advantage, and allow them to get into new businesses and new ways of doing business. So we're setting about using virtualization as the foundation to really try and help turn IT into a service, help IT to become fundamentally easier to do, fundamentally more flexible, and fundamentally more efficient. So we see ourselves working in a way of providing a path forward for existing and new applications to achieve new levels of efficiency, new levels of control, and new levels of choice. So many of the things that I'll talk about this morning are designed to contribute to those 3 points of efficiency, control, and choice. And we are structuring our efforts around 3 initiatives. One is something that we call the Virtual Data Center Operating System, which you can think of as a new substrate of software that provides the foundation either for an internal cloud, allowing IT to operate more like a hosting provider inside the data center, as well as the foundation for external clouds, where you'll see us later this morning talk in a lot of detail about the work we're doing with service providers, providing choice and federation. And lastly, extending the virtues of virtualization to client-side computing, helping to turn the provisioning of end-user computing into more of a service as well. So we're going to go through these 3 initiatives this morning, talking more about what are we doing to provide that foundation, to allow IT to become more of a service, more of a hosting service inside the company, how we're working with service providers to extend that, and what we're doing on the desktop. So if you look at what we're doing inside the data center, we've gone through several significant stages of growth. Clearly, we started actually back 10 years ago now as a client hypervisor company. Around about 2000, people began to use actually virtualization on servers and found that there was tremendous benefit there because there was this issue that most of the x86-based servers in the world, thanks to the efforts of people like myself at Microsoft during the 1990s, had caused this proliferation of servers around the world, most of which that were running at very, very low levels of utilization, typically 10% or less. So we had a tremendous amount of hardware that was being underutilized, and virtualization provided a straightforward way to dramatically increase the utilization of those servers. And as you began to put virtualization on more and more servers, it was observed that you could get those hypervisors that were sitting on each of the servers to start cooperating and working together, and providing additional benefits, not just of efficiency, but flexibility as well, allowing you to not only pack workloads more efficiently onto individual servers, but move them more freely between servers, starting to achieve even greater levels of efficiency, but also availability, redundancy, distributed resource scheduling, etc. So the name of the game started to come about, not about individual hypervisors, but how these hypervisors work together. That also led to the need for management software to help you orchestrate and control that. So we have been working along that generation for several years now. In many cases, our competitors are starting just to catch up to us in terms of what it takes to not only have an individual hypervisor, but to get those hypervisors to work together. And we're about to take some dramatic steps forward in terms of further extending this notion of cooperating hypervisors to the point where they will become essentially a single unifying platform. And that leads us to this discussion of the cloud, which is becoming very popular right now. And we're using this really as shorthand for a way of thinking about computing, an architecture for doing computing. And how do we take internal IT operations as well as external operations in the service provider world and put those onto a stronger, firmer foundation. And our view of this starts with industry standard building blocks. In other words, we believe that the cloud, whether it be the external cloud as provided by service providers or the internal cloud as it will be implemented inside the corporate data centers, will be built upon standardized, cost-effective industry hardware building blocks. And then we will use that to support our existing applications by adding in a layer of software that basically allows scalability and availability through software. In other words, we take those industry standard hardware building blocks, and by adding in software, we are in some sense turning them into a single giant computer. I often like to joke and say, when I'm talking to people over the age of 45, I say what we're trying to do is build a software mainframe. A lot of people get all sort of tears in their eyes at that point and say, oh yes, we knew that this was the right way to go all along, and this distributed computing was just kind of a crazy juvenile disease that we had. But in many ways it is that. It is by using software and industry standard building blocks, allowing you to very effectively pool resources together and think of them as a single giant computing resource. Now, this notion of virtualization in existing applications is an important one, because one thing I've realized is that one of the key attributes of virtualization is not so much that you can use hardware resources more efficiently and run multiple operating systems on a single CPU, etc., but it's fundamentally about encapsulation. You can take an existing application and all of the complexity around it, the middleware, even the operating system itself, and package it up into a black box, if you like, and start to treat that black box in a fundamentally more flexible way, because you've abstracted it away from the underlying infrastructure. And you can start to inject new intelligence in a non-disruptive way around those applications. So virtualization thus becomes a natural insertion point for things like security, compliance, where you can do it in one place and know that it will apply uniformly across all your existing applications. You don't have to go through application by application trying to find the right places to plug the holes, or go through the underlying hardware infrastructure or network infrastructure and try and plug holes there. This new substrate becomes not only the means of aggregation, but also the means, the correct place to insert a lot of policy, compliance, and other control issues into the environment. So that's why we talk about efficiency and control in this environment.